David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Someone should really explain to the president that the things he says in fundraising meetings and speeches, even if they're not televised, might someday become public. And as a result of exactly that, Donald Trump has now been caught red-handed admitting that he just makes stuff up when he talks to world leaders. Yesterday, Donald Trump admitted during a fundraising speech that he straight up made up information when meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And when they met, Trump said to Justin Trudeau that the U.S. runs a trade deficit with Canada. And this is all related to the broader narrative that Trump likes to put out there, that it's all very unfair for the U.S. on trade. We have trade deficits with just everybody. Of course, it's not true. And Trump admitted that he said it not knowing whether it was true or not. When I saw the headline, Trump makes stuff up when speaking with world leaders, I immediately thought, oh, yeah, we know that. Obviously, Trump's making stuff up all the time. But no, we now know specifically of something that Trump said to Justin Trudeau without having any idea whether it was true. Here's the stunning transcript from Donald Trump's fundraising speech in Missouri to donors, where Trump said, this is Trump telling the story as per the Washington Post. Trudeau came to see me. He's a good guy, Justin. He said, no, we have no trade deficit with you. We have none, Donald, please. Trump said, mimicking Trudeau, according to audio of the private event in Missouri obtained by the Washington Post. Nice guy, good-looking guy, comes in. Donald, we have no trade deficit. He's very proud because everybody else, you know, we're getting killed. Trump goes on to say, so he's proud. I said, wrong, Justin, you do. I didn't even know. I had no idea. I just said, you're wrong. And you know why? Because we're so stupid. And I thought they were smart. I said, you're wrong, Justin. He said, nope, we have a trade deficit. I said, well, in that case, I feel differently. I said, but I don't believe it. I sent one of our guys out, his guy, my guy, they went out. I said, check, because I can't believe it. Well, sir, you're actually right. We have no deficit, but that doesn't include energy and timber. And when you do, we lose $17 billion a year. It's incredible. So first, let me just translate, because the parsing of this stuff is pretty damn difficult because of how Trump speaks. What he's saying is that without knowing the truth about whether we have a trade deficit or trade surplus with Canada, Trump asserted that we have a trade deficit. Then he says he sent out one of his guys to check it out, and that the guy came back and said, you were right, Mr. President. We lose $17 billion a year. In other words, we have a $17 billion a year trade deficit to Canada. Now, the most important thing here is that it's not true. The United States actually has a trade surplus with Canada, not a deficit. So on the facts, I don't think anybody in the audience is going to be surprised that Donald Trump said something that wasn't true. But I want to get to this sort of deliberate lying. And part of that, in order to just kind of show you the weirdness of what Trump says, there's one other really strange thing from the fundraising speech that caught my eye. And it seems like a total non sequitur by Trump, talking about a bowling ball test, where at a certain point during this speech, Donald Trump said, it's the bowling ball test. They take a bowling ball from 20 feet up in the air and drop it on the hood of the car, Trump said of Japan. If the hood dents, the car doesn't qualify. It's horrible, he said. It was unclear what he was talking about. I like that, the little add-in from the Washington Post. It was unclear what the president was talking about, sort of the mantra of this administration. And I would love it, actually, if Trump has started running around testing their cars by dropping bowling balls on the hoods from 20 feet up. I don't think that would go particularly well.
I'm not even sure if they'd be testing the cars. They could be testing the bowling balls instead.
Yeah, who knows which is harder. It's sort of like diamond is the hardest, but what's tough? Well, I think that's the whole point, right? To test the quality of the car, but you might have a really crappy bowling ball. That's a good point. Wharton should be ashamed of itself for having admitted this man to its academic program. More embarrassment. And, you know, there's the sort of like Trump's a liar and that's bad side of this entire thing. But we can't expect the leaders of our country and of other countries to productively work together if they can't even just establish some basic facts, knowable facts, right? Like, does the United States have a trade deficit or a trade surplus with regard to Canada? The level of distrust that would be correct for other countries to have when dealing with Donald Trump is directly putting the United States at a disadvantage. And it is an actual national security issue, because what you have increasingly are circumstances where you can't trust Donald Trump not to spill secrets from our allies, including what took place in the Oval Office with Sergei Kislyak and other Russians, where Trump just spilled the beans on things that Israel had told us. You can't trust Donald Trump to even deal straight ahead on the facts, even just knowable economic data. So we're not going to really be able to fix problems or even garner respect from world leaders around the world if this is what Donald Trump is seen and understood to be doing. And it's horrible that he's admitting it, but I'm glad he's admitting it. Okay.
Okay. I was just going to say, I feel as though it's one thing when he lies to his lackeys.
Yes.
Because they're working for him. They're not going to cross him and go to the media and say
More
otherwise.
than likely not.
But these foreign leaders, they have their own interests at heart. So they're going to call him out on a lie if they have to.
Yeah, although for some reason it's not clear Trudeau did call him out right then and there, but ultimately we did learn the truth, and I think that's really the most important thing here. Okay, so Trump admits and almost really brags like it's a really cool thing that he was able to do. He just lies to Justin Trudeau as if that's kind of an accomplishment in some way. Very backward set of priorities that we're seeing here. We continue to learn more about Donald Trump firing Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. The initial line that we heard explaining the firing was that Tillerson was notified of the firing last Friday, and it was over disagreements with Trump over trade and possibly how to handle the North Korea situation. And very quickly, that explanation started to look pretty dubious, because Tillerson's spokesman said Tillerson didn't find out about the firing Friday. He found out about it when Donald Trump tweeted about it earlier this week. And that led us to look more deeply into the timing and wonder whether this actually has something more to do, not so much with Tillerson's views on trade in North Korea, but the fact that Tillerson endorsed the official UK position that Russia had its hands all over the recent nerve gas poisoning of a former Russian spy in the UK, while the White House had not, at least up until that point, accepted that. There was another possibility related to Russia, this one a little more complex, related to ExxonMobil, which Rex Tillerson was formerly the CEO of, pulling out of a possible Arctic drilling deal with Russia, and Tillerson not intervening to help keep it in place. In other words, two Russia-related explanations. But now we have a new and possibly even more interesting hypothesis, which comes to us from Sigurd Neubauer in the foreword, which suggests that actually the underlying motive for firing Rex Tillerson might have been Donald Trump's desire to protect his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And this requires a little bit of explanation. Tillerson and Kushner were actually on opposing sides of an incident that ended up exposing a bunch of information about Kushner that's really not great for him. And you might remember, we've talked about this a little bit, Kushner's family owns this building in Manhattan called 666 Fifth Avenue, okay? And it's been financially in disarray. It's a real estate venture that has not gone particularly well for the Kushner family. Tons of debt. The Kushners have been trying to get financing for the property. And if this is ringing a bell, it's because I did talk about this a few months ago. Jared Kushner's family was trying to get financing for this project from an investment group in Qatar. And as I mentioned before, the Qatari group ultimately said, nah, we're not interested. We're not going to go forward with this project. And then weeks later, there was a new blockade put in place against Qatar by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. Later on, we found out that Donald Trump was very much in favor of that blockade, and that part of the reason Trump was so in favor of it is that Jared Kushner was pushing Trump hard to support it. We now have also learned that outgoing former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was completely opposed to Donald Trump supporting that blockade. And now we've learned that Tillerson was reportedly furious about this and directly blamed Kushner. In other words, said, it's Kushner's fault that Trump is doing this thing that I vehemently disagree with. There's a close associate of Tillerson's who said to reporters, Rex put two and two together and concluded that this absolutely vacuous kid was running a second foreign policy out of the White House family quarters. Now, there's two reasons why Jared Kushner might have supported this blockade on Qatar. The sort of more well-known, but maybe less plausible one is it was just revenge, right? Jared Kushner was angry that the Qataris were not going to fund his real estate project, and he wanted to punish them with a blockade, a financial blockade. The other one here is that is increasingly more plausible, although it's been less discussed, is that Kushner is tied to the UAE, and that it was the UAE, the Emirates, that were aggressively pushing Kushner to push Trump to push for this blockade. Either way, the big picture is that more and more, it seems that Rex Tillerson was right, that Jared Kushner was influenced by, whether you like the 666 Fifth Avenue story or the UAE story, whichever one of those or both you believe, the idea here is that Tillerson was right. Tillerson put two and two together, and that the firing of Rex Tillerson was actually to protect Jared Kushner, because Trump knew that Tillerson had figured out what Kushner was doing and why he was so aggressively pushing Trump on this. And he figured out some of the underlying reasons why, and that by getting rid of Tillerson, he's protecting Kushner and just getting Tillerson square out of the way. Now, I don't know if this is the, quote, real explanation. I don't know if it's the Russian nerve gas explanation or the Russian Arctic drilling explanation. But what's super clear at this point is that the simple and clean and tidy explanation of, oh, he was removed over disagreements on trade, tariffs, and North Korea, that's the least believable of all of the explanations that we've seen so far. Send me your thoughts. What do you think is the real reason here that Rex Tillerson was fired so abruptly by Donald Trump? I'm on Twitter at @dpakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Richard Carnes. Richard, thank you. We depend on the support of really great people like Richard Carnes, who is our new member of the day, and also from really great people who have been with us for years. And today's sustaining member of the day is Mark Dwenish. Mark, thank you. Mark has been a member since 2011, approaching his 7-year anniversary with the show. Thank you. I mean, it's amazing that we've had people with us 7 and even 8 years at this point, and it's because of you that the program has become what it is. Sign up, join Richard and Mark at davidpakman.com/membership. More on membership discounts and free bumper stickers a little bit later in the program. Our David Pakman Show subreddit is just doing so well. I was looking for some kind of a more descriptive vocabulary, but it's just doing incredibly well. We're approaching 6,000 of our viewers and listeners subscribed at davidpakman.com/Reddit regularly. Really great discussions and conversations about politics, about the show, suggestions for guests and stories. I noticed this morning that there was a question posed on the subreddit which asked, should David do more videos on feminism, which I find interesting. And as many in the audience know, I am both someone who believes in the principles, the basic tenets of feminism, and yet have been critical of some of the more recent developments, some of the more sort of extreme flavors of feminism that have developed. But of course, I do consider myself someone who believes in the importance of egalitarianism and basic feminism. However, it's a topic I can't touch without pissing off a lot of people. And it's sort of like when we talk about circumcision or when I talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's one of those where like 10% of the audience just appreciates me discussing it in a sort of even-handed way. And the other 90% is either furious at what I said or furious at what I didn't say. But listen, we talk about feminism on the program. I'm not shying away from it. And I don't know, should I be doing more videos on feminism? I'm not sure. I'll put it to the audience to give me feedback about that. Also on our subreddit, let's play a game, Who's Next? This is like a cabinet firing bingo, Trump administration bingo, where people are voting for who they think is going to go next from Trump's cabinet. I'm preparing myself for just a total cabinet shakedown. I think that there could be major changes here. We're hearing about H.R. McMaster, who is, as National Security Advisor, is not actually a cabinet member, but certainly a close aide to Trump. The White House is reportedly furious about how Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, totally bungled a couple of recent interviews, one on 60 Minutes, one on NBC News. She could be on the chopping block. Chief of Staff John Kelly, again, Chief of Staff, on the cabinet, but there's constant discussion about whether he's going to go. Jeff Sessions is reportedly maybe going to get fired and also maybe going to fire Andrew McCabe. I wouldn't know who to guess. I still think Kushner needs to go. And again, he's not a cabinet member by any means.
The Jeff Sessions one is a little bit tricky because as Trump's attorney general, you may get into some obstruction of justice concerns there.
By firing him.
By firing him. Maybe Mueller would look into that, trying to obstruct the Russia investigation.
Yeah, even though Sessions is recused on it, but still that doesn't mean...
He's still related.
He's still related, and Sessions can make decisions that would impact that investigation based on who he hires or fires, for sure.
I'm going to go with H.R. McMaster.
Yeah, I think he's going. I think he's going very, very soon. So anyway, you can vote on that if you check out that thread. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, compliments about the Scientology interviews that have been done and that we should do more of these or not. We've been thinking of doing sort of a Scientology. We have enough Scientology-related material at this point between interviewing L. Ron Hubbard's grandson or great-grandson, I forget now, Jamie DeWolf. We've interviewed a number of high-level Scientologists. We've interviewed Sea Org Scientologists. We could do like almost a mini documentary on Scientology based around our interviews alone. And I think it's a fascinating cult, but I don't want to spend more time on it than it deserves either. In the end, I think they have under 100,000 members or something.
We could book Tom Cruise. I think that'll be a little different, though.
Sure. I don't see that happening anytime soon. And lastly, from the David Pakman Show subreddit, Perpetuate. I am being called out for using the wrong word. I used the word perpetrate when I should have said perpetuate. I do know the difference between these two, so I appreciate the grammatical correction. I think it was probably a verbal slip, a verbal typo, where I had what some might call a brain fart or a glitch of some kind.
Happens.
A neuron fired or didn't fire, based on, I guess, what your perspective on that is. But listen, I do know the difference between perpetrate and perpetuate, and I will make every effort to perpetuate a strong English grammar ethic on the program. Anyway, sign up free, discuss politics and the show with other viewers at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Okay, I've got another InfoWars Alex Jones bumper sticker takedown to tell you about. You might remember that a couple weeks ago, Ryan from Rochester wrote in and he said, David, every day driving to work, there's an electrical transformer with an InfoWars bumper sticker on it. I want to cover it with a David Pakman Show bumper sticker. We sent Ryan a bumper sticker, and he did it, and we got pictures. Well, I later heard from Spencer in Florida. And Spencer in Florida said, hey, David, you know those big yellow Amazon lockers where you can either pick up or leave items that you're returning to Amazon? There's a bright yellow Amazon locker near where I live, and it's got an InfoWars bumper sticker. Of course, InfoWars of Alex Jones conspiracy theory fame. And Spencer sent in a picture of what it looked like, and people who were watching, plain and simple, you see it's that yellow metal that the Amazon locker is made of with an InfoWars bumper sticker on it. And I sent Spencer a bumper sticker, actually got it for free with his new membership, and it has now been covered. That InfoWars bumper sticker has now been covered with a David Pakman Show bumper sticker that you can spot from pretty far away. And I want to congratulate Spencer and, of course, remind him and everybody else that I don't know the legality of this. I have no clue whether this thing counts as private property or not, this Amazon locker. I don't endorse any breaking of any laws whatsoever, full stop, period. But if you do stuff like this and it's interesting, it might get my attention and it might be discussed on the program.
I think we can expect now an angry rant from Alex Jones. He's going to take his shirt off, get hyped up on male enhancement pills.
Yeah.
He's going to come after you for this.
That would be a great day for the show. I hope that that happens. And listen, if you want to do this, if you know of a spot that could use a David Pakman Show bumper sticker, you can get the bumper stickers for free right now. They come in two colors. You can get the black bumper sticker or you can get the white bumper sticker. You can get them for free with any new yearly membership. I think about a dozen people have already done this. You go to davidpakman.com/membership. You make sure you are over on the yearly tab, pick the yearly membership of your choice, and then just write to me after you sign up and say, hey, David, I signed up for a yearly membership. I want the black bumper sticker. Here is my address. And to make it even more enticing for you, you don't even have to pay full price, because we've got a coupon code right now that will save you 40% off of any membership. This applies to monthly and yearly memberships. That code is VoteSoon18, okay? All one word, all lowercase, VoteSoon18. Sign up for any yearly membership, get 40% off, and get a free bumper sticker if you want it. And by all means, I want to make sure people know, if you've got interesting bumper sticker placements, please send us pictures, ideally before and after, not too zoomed in so we can actually see the context of where it is. And these have been going out by the dozens. We're actually, I almost might have to reorder bumper stickers within a couple months once again. Usually a supply lasts us like a year and a half. And I'm already thinking, if things continue like this, I'm going to have to order some more. All right. So get that done. You can also participate in the political discussions on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDBIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Sean Flynn, who is the chair of the economics department at Scripps College. He's an entrepreneur. He studies free market healthcare and is also the best-selling author of Economics for Dummies. And he's also running for Congress as a Republican. And Sean, I've been following your work on the Singapore healthcare system for a long time. And it's not often discussed in the United States in the conversations between sort of like a total free market system, which tends to be favored by the American right, versus a sort of Medicare for all system or single payer system, which is more popular on the American left. Talk a little bit about the sort of primary tenets of the Singapore healthcare system.
Well, yeah, David, thank you so much. I guess that your intro is a great way to slide into Singapore here, because, you know, we are very ideologically driven when it comes to healthcare and social reform in general in this country. And Singapore, by contrast, is just a total pragmatist. And so they've gone out and collected various pieces and parts we could discuss, put them all together, and they're spending half as much as Canada, England, France, and about 75% less than we are. And they're covering everyone, and they've got essentially the world's best healthcare outcomes, no matter what statistic you look like, or they're in the top 3 or 4 for everything. And so I think that's a good place to go, is just starting off with the non-ideological nature of the system and just doing what works to cover everyone.
Yeah, and they have elements that are sort of more in the for-profit, free market direction, but they also have some relatively, heavy enough-handed, more authoritarian style provisions that I think would not be very palatable to the American right. Can you talk a little bit about how the system is structured?
Sure. Okay, so one thing the American right, and I think most Americans would agree with, is, we believe, at least all of us to some extent, that markets are the absolute best way to go in terms of getting efficiency. But then, of course, there's other issues involved than just efficiency. But they've got price tags on everything. So you can go to Singapore and say you needed a knee surgery. You could call around or go online, actually, and just get the prices for every orthopedic surgeon in the country, which forces all the doctors to compete against each other on both price and quality. And we know competition in healthcare in the United States works because we can point at things like LASIK. So anything here that is not covered by our crazy insurance system, things like LASIK eye surgery, cosmetic surgery, there are treatments like laser treatments for varicose veins, anything that we call elective is cash and carry and free market here. And what you see is prices falling year after year, and you see quality going up. And so my favorite example there is that LASIK eye surgery used to be, say, $5,000 an eyeball, and you can now find it for like $500 with a Groupon, right? And, Groupon means doctors are marketing, they're competing, they're having to, figure out better ways to do anything. So Singapore has that. So it's got price tags and competition.
Now, to add to that, Sean, before we move on to the next point, to add
Sure.
to that, there is one other factor also in Singapore that is working to push prices down, which is that there's significant government involvement in care, right? Government is a big player there in terms of the hospitals and in other ways. So again, it's sort of a blend of both ideas that would be palatable to the left and right.
Okay, so you're right about the government, and so 80% of the acute hospital beds, right? If something goes really wrong for you, 80% of the beds are in the big public hospitals rather than private hospitals. But even there, David, so we need to separate out the provision versus the financing of healthcare. So you're absolutely right that the government is doing a lot of the actual building of the buildings, and here's the hospital. But in terms of the finance and the competition, even those public hospitals, the way the financing works, it's the same system with the posted prices and the competition between doctors. And they even made every public hospital its own independent nonprofit that can set its own prices and can set its own, remuneration for the doctors and staff, so that even the public hospitals have to compete against each other to get people's business. So it really is, as you say, a remarkable blend, but we need to be careful there because the healthcare finance system, at least this part with the prices and competition, it's system-wide, including the public hospitals. So it's not as though they're running one set of competitive posted prices hospitals, and then there's another set that's insulated from prices that happens to be covered by the government. The whole system has this price pressure and competition, both public and private.
Is it fair to say that you have a system that, in a sense, would be like, if I read one line that if Milton Friedman were a socialist, this would sort of be the system he would have designed?
I don't know who wrote that, but given that Milton Friedman was above all a pragmatist, right? I wouldn't say, even though his reputation is, hey, I'm a free market guy, at least in his own mind, he was a practical guy first. And so whether he would have been a socialist instead of, what we think of him as this big free market advocate, I think this would have been the first place he'd look to, because they're spending way less than everyone and delivering way better care to the entire population. Like, they don't shove their veterans in a different system there, or their older people or poorer people. Like, literally everyone's going to the same hospitals and enjoying the same benefits of their system. So I think, that would have, had he been a socialist, appealed to him greatly.
What is the connection, if any, between employment and your employer in Singapore and your health insurance?
Very, very little. If it's there are employers who offer healthcare benefits, but they're above and beyond what is in the core system. And let me discuss that, because this goes back to finishing off your question earlier about their system. So one thing they have is all this price transparency and competition, but you still need to make sure that people have access. And so the way they do that in Singapore, and I would actually offer a slightly different model for the United States. It's been shown by, state of Indiana to work with Medicaid, Whole Foods Markets to work in the private sector here. But the core system over there, in terms of making sure there's access, is they first set up, what we call catastrophic insurance or high deductible insurance here. But then they make sure everyone has a way to actually pay their annual deductible. Because as you know here, with things like Obamacare bronze plans, there are a lot of people making $10 an hour, but they've got a $10,000 annual deductible. And in some sense, they're effectively uninsured. Even though they're paying premiums, they're not going to have $10,000 to cover an annual deductible. So that's the core problem with any sort of high deductible or catastrophic system.
Okay, no, but Sean, let me just so I'm clear,
Sure.
Let me make sure I understand where you're getting those numbers. There would be, and there is, a maximum yearly out-of-pocket that accounts both for the deductible and the premium. So even though someone making $10 an hour on a bronze plan might on paper have a $10,000 deductible, their total yearly out-of-pocket would be limited by the provisions that put a maximum on how much relative to your income you'd spend on healthcare in a year.
Yes, and it's good the government did that, because these people would be otherwise, effectively uninsured, which would defeat the entire purpose of the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
And so in Singapore, they've done it a slightly different way, but one that preserves the incentives to always look around, shop around for the best deal, keep price competition. And so what they do there is there's $2,000 a year annual deductibles, basically the number, and then above that, a 10% copay, all the way up to infinity. And so give me a second there to show how people are protected, because that sounds dangerous. And so then what the government does to make sure you've got some money in your pocket at all times, when you're born, they just give $3,000 into a health savings account. When you start working, You're required in Singapore to put 7% of your income every year into a health savings account. The government's run properly, so they actually guarantee it 4% interest, so it's constantly accumulating. Most people are quite healthy till they're about my age, mid-40s, and so you have these huge piles of health savings, and then people go out and they can cover their annual deductibles, and then they can cover those copays. And if for some reason something goes really catastrophically wrong, and 10% up to infinity means you could run out of money, right? The government then has a safety net there, and they treat you first, and then you basically put in a little grant application asking the government, hey, I ran out of money, could you cover this? And the answer there, the government, they approve 99.3% of all the applications. So they've got this rock solid safety net in combination with a healthcare system where there's competition. Like even people of very modest means there have money in their pockets to actually go out and into a consumer marketplace and put pressure on the doctors to keep prices down, because they always have some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Because any money they don't spend out of that annual 2,000 deductible or that copay, that 10% above, they get to keep. And so that's the other thing in their system that sort of is the feedback mechanism that we've currently lost in our system, is there isn't intense, constant pressure by consumers with their own bodies, with their own money, to keep the providers in line and providing things at low cost and high quality.
Yeah, and this was the next thing I wanted to talk about in terms of, just understanding sort of the way the American political spectrum sees this type of stuff, which is that mandatory health savings account contribution. I think it's a very, very interesting way to fund this, and it's not something that I'm against. But you would see, particularly from members of your party in the United States, just apoplectic nanny state BS reactions to that. Who's to tell me I need to put aside 7% of my income for health insurance, even though, of course, we do it with the first a percentage of the first 120,000 we earn to Social Security. Some people have a problem with that as well. That would be a tough pill to swallow for many in the United States, wouldn't it?
Well, I think so. And the fears might go even deeper to a cynicism that says, wow, we've got all these entitlement problems coming down the line. Maybe they're going to tell me they're going to take my health savings account now, but then later on they'll redirect it towards something else, right? So there'd be a lot of political fears.
Yep.
So the way it's been handled here in the United States is, for instance, Whole Foods markets, they just make an annual deposit into their workers' health savings accounts, right? They just essentially gift people, or look, from the workers' perspective, it looks like a gift. There's this pile of money that just goes in every year into their health savings account, and it accumulates, and they're told, hey, you've also got high deductible coverage, catastrophic. We gave you the amount of the annual deductible. Anything you don't spend, you get to keep. And that gives them an incentive to shop around. Now, of course, there are no price tags in our system, right? So it's not, all these things put together, but at least the insurance component, the way you handle it here is, instead of explicitly taxing people, you just make it look like a gift, right? It's their money out of total compensation, but it goes in their health savings accounts. And this has worked wonders, all across the income spectrum. So we have, the example of the Healthy Indiana program that actually was put in place in 2011 in the state of Indiana. And what they did there was they had some extra tobacco tax revenue. And they said, hey, let's cover more working poor. There are people who currently are not poor enough to qualify for Medicaid in this state. These are good people. They're working hard. They're doing all the right things. We want them to move up and be able to help their families. So let's put them into Medicaid, but let's make it look something like this what Singapore does with the high deductible and the annual deposits. And so they created a version of Medicaid there that has an $1,100 per year annual deductible, which you might say, oh my goodness, someone working for very little wages, they can't afford that. But then the state also gifted each person $1,100 a year. And so when you see that, you realize they're financially safe, right? Because they've been given the $1,100 to cover the annual deductible. And then, of course, since it's Medicaid, anything above the $1,100 is all on the government. So these people are equally financially safe and secure as anyone on normal Medicaid, where there's first dollar coverage, right? And if Medicaid approves it, all spending in normal Medicaid starts with the first dollar all the way up. So it's 100%. Here you've got an annual deductible, but you give people the amount of the annual deductible. And what you find when you put people into a system like that and you tell them any money you don't spend is money you get to keep out of that annual deductible, and next year there'll be another $1,100, and the third year another $1,100. When you tell people that, whether they're on Medicaid or they're a Whole Foods employee, and we've got randomized experiments I could point to, healthcare spending falls by about a third, 30 to 35%, just by people shopping around for the best deal. And, I used to have, do martial arts all the time, and I would always go get everything X-rayed, even though I knew it was almost nothing because I had a $10 copay, right? But if it becomes your own money, you're a little more cautious. And
yeah,
the
that's
great thing
true.
there-
But at the same time, Sean, I mean, I want to push back a little because it's been pretty widely studied that the myth of people overusing healthcare merely because they don't pay anything out of pocket, by and large, people have lives. They're not just looking to get procedures done for the sake of it. And big picture, if a system's going to work or not going to work, I don't believe it's going to be determined whether it works or not by people saying, hey, you know what? Since it's covered, I'm going to go get procedures done and see doctors.
Well, okay, so I can, I don't mean to stumble over my words here, but I can point you to overwhelming evidence, starting with the largest randomized trial that was done by the Rand Corporation over like 15 years, and then starting in the 1970s. There's the ongoing Oregon health insurance experiment, which was a full randomization of Medicaid patients. I can actually point you to a ton of evidence that says people cut back on their spending by a third.
Yeah,
Now,
but I think
that's
what's missing from those studies, in the ones I've seen anyway, is that it doesn't account for the long-term cost savings that the system experiences, because some of that stuff people are choosing to do is going to prevent more expensive conditions and treatment down the line.
Okay, so that is the argument, but honestly, David, I could show you the stuff I've seen and the things. They, for instance, in the state of Indiana, they intentionally exempted all the long-term care stuff. And I could point you to another Indiana thing where it was state government employees starting in 2007. The people were going in for mammograms just as often. The people were going in for annual treatment, the annual checkups just as often. I could go on with a whole bunch of these. Yeah. It honestly looks, because David, you're right to be suspicious about that, but all the evidence I've seen says it looks like the people are going in for all the preventative maintenance at the exact same rate. And even with that Rand health study back in the 70s, they followed people both before 5 years, when they were 5 to 10 years when they were in, and another 5 years after. And except for very minor things like the difference between 2026 and 2027 vision, there were no statistically significant differences in health outcomes. And this is a little known fact, and I know people should be very suspicious on this point, but all the evidence I've seen, and I looked hard, David, I really did, because I actually didn't believe in this Singapore thing or any of this stuff. I actually came to this as a total doubter when I first heard about it back in 2009, and was honestly baffled at first when I kept finding evidence, and then I had to fly to Singapore to confirm that, well, it seems to work over there, and I kept going back and forth. But honestly, David, there's a pile of evidence that that's not actually a problem. And let me give you just one statistic. So in the state of Indiana with the government employees, when people were on PPOs or HMOs and they had the choice between here's the expensive brand name drug and here's the generically equivalent, the chemically equivalent generic drug, when they were on PPOs or HMOs and it was someone else's money, 93% of the time they'd go for the more expensive one. When you switch them over into this, this sort of Singapore-ish looking system with the high deductible insurance and the gift of the annual deductible, that fell from 93% of the time choosing the expensive version of the drug down to only 13. So you see these massive sea changes in behavior that cut the cost without cutting care, and I could give other examples like that.
Yeah, no, that's that's interesting. I'm open to being convinced of that. I've not seen the evidence, but I want to look for it, and I want to see what that is. I specifically with the Indiana data, I'm just not familiar with that data, so I'm open to looking at that. Sean, this is super interesting. We are out of time, and I do want to tell people that not a ton of Republicans in our audience, but if people do want to find out more about your campaign on issues other than healthcare, what's the best place for them to do that?
So the website might be the best place to start, and then they can find all the links for Facebook and everything. So that's my full name, Sean Flynn, FORcongress.com. So SEANFLYNN, Sean Flynn, FORcongress.com. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Yet another teacher has fired a gun in school. This time there were injuries. In fact, 3 students injured. And this relates to sort of a follow-up story. Last week I told you that in Georgia, a teacher barricaded himself inside of a classroom and fired his gun when the school principal was approaching the classroom. And fortunately, didn't hit anybody. Teacher eventually arrested without further incident. And we have another one of these stories. This one relates to a teacher named Dennis Alexander in Meredith, California, who fired a pistol inside of class while reportedly either lecturing about public safety or teaching students how to disarm someone with a gun, which raises more questions than it answers, actually. 3 students were injured. Nobody died. The gun was pointing at the ceiling when the teacher fired it. Bullet fragments bounced off the ceiling and hit a student in the neck. Student's going to be okay. And then 2 other students were hit not by bullet fragments, but by debris caused by the firing of the gun, and those are also minor injuries. So this one is already getting super complex, right? First question is the teacher allowed to have a gun on school grounds? And the answer is unclear, because teachers aren't supposed to be armed, but this teacher happens to also be a reserve police officer for Sand City Police in California, and there are exceptions to the no guns on school campus, on school property rules for law enforcement. But what about part-time law enforcement? Does it apply if you are sometimes part-time law enforcement, but you're there as a teacher and not as a cop? I guess we're going to see. But until they figure out whether or not he's allowed to have a gun, he's on administrative leave. But I want to get to really what the other question is here. I've talked about how really an accidental shooting is a negligent discharge of a firearm. So he's obviously going to be charged, right, with negligent discharge of a firearm. Well, maybe not. The problem is how the California negligent discharge law is written. This is Penal Code 246.3, and it says under California Penal Code, you commit the crime of negligent discharge of a firearm if you willfully discharge a firearm in a grossly negligent manner, which could result in someone's injury or death. Accidental shootings, by definition, are not willful, and thus I am not expecting there to be charges here. And whether or not there are charges, whether or not the law was broken here, isn't it very clear that arming teachers is a terrible idea? I mean, this was a reserve police officer and teacher who injured 3 students by accidentally firing his gun. And people are talking about arming teachers. And the other really strange thing that I alluded to earlier is that most of the reports are saying, the question was, why did the guy have a firearm anyway? Most of the reports say he was in the middle of teaching public safety in the class. But there's a couple of reports that say he was teaching students how to disarm a gunman, which, number one, why is that something that you would be teaching in school to begin with? And number 2, why do you need to do that with a loaded gun? Like, even if we say, okay, we're going to put aside the analysis of why this is something the guy was teaching, why would you be teaching that with a loaded gun? How is it even possible that this is going on? I don't really understand it. But there's certainly more than we've learned so far here. And obviously there's only one solution here, which is we have to get rid of schools altogether. No, I'm sorry, that's stupid. We need to arm the students to defend themselves from the teachers, but keep the schools.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't cautious enough to know that the gun was loaded. Maybe there was one in the chamber.
Yep.
At least he was cautious enough not to point the gun at someone or at the wall across from him.
I guess.
Because this could have been a lot worse.
For all we know, at some point, he did point the gun at someone or at the wall across the way. And eventually, by sheer luck or odds, I don't know what you want to call it, it discharged when it was pointed up at the ceiling. But I mean, just think about, this was a discharge into the ceiling and 3 students were injured. Fortunately, none of them super seriously, and only one of them even had what we would consider more than minor injuries. But that's an accidental gunshot at the ceiling. Imagine the degree of chaos that could be wreaked with these guns in schools if the firearm is pointed almost anywhere but the ceiling.
And he perhaps was teaching the students how to disarm a gunman.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine that demonstration had him moving around and ducking and jumping, and the gun would be pointing in a whole bunch of different directions.
I can't even imagine.
So it's good that he pointed it at the ceiling, at least at the end.
Yeah, congratulations. You didn't actually shoot anyone directly. Only bullet fragments hit a kid. Please, let's just move away from this idea of arming teachers. I have a story for you that's a very strange story from the world of white supremacy. It's sort of a story about the downfall of an entire white supremacist family. I'd say right now the most well-known white supremacist types are probably people like Richard Spencer, Jared Taylor, half of Trump's advisors. Okay, I'm kind of kidding there. I know I'm missing some, but there's this guy named Matthew Heimbach, right? Matthew Heimbach has been on lists of notable white supremacists for a long time. And the news is that Heimbach was arrested earlier this week because he had an altercation with his landlord. Now, his landlord also happens to be his mother-in-law, and his mother-in-law also happens to be the woman that he had an affair with. Apparently, Heimbach's father-in-law worked with Heimbach to build the Traditionalist Worker Party, which is one of these white supremacist organizations that wants a whites-only ethno-state that is by and large failing miserably in their priorities and goals. But at the same time that Heimbach was working on the neo-Nazi stuff with his father-in-law, he was sleeping with his mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law eventually went to Heimbach's wife, her daughter, and said, this is what's been going on. The entire thing exploded. And there's the funniest little detail in all of this. We're on the police forms that were filled out after the incident. All four of them, right? Heimbach, Heimbach's wife, and her parents. They all list their occupations on the police report, which we're showing you on screen, as white nationalists. White nationalist is actually how they were booked or not booked rather, but documented as commenting on this incident. And, you know, we sort of see this story differently than some random dude in a trailer park in Indiana because Matthew Heimbach is well known. He's a well-known entity in the white supremacist community. But if we put that aside for a second and just look at the big picture, is anyone really shocked about a story where a white nationalist family living in a trailer park in Indiana is in trouble for fighting family members in connection with a guy having sex with his mother-in-law? Like the story could not be less remarkable other than the fact that this is a known white supremacist that's been on the radar of organizations that track hate groups for years. White dudes just can't get a break, huh? It's like you're trying to build a white supremacist party with your father-in-law and just have a casual affair with your mother-in-law, and next thing you know, the police are there and you're in big trouble.
I know this is just one anecdote, but I feel like it totally debunks the theory of white supremacy, don't you?
On principle, yeah. Never, ever, ever trust these people, right? Because these are the people that will tell you everybody else is living immorally and the Jews are bad and the blacks are bad and gay people are immoral and lesbians are just terrible and blah, 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 blah. Yet they are the epitome of those who want to legislate morality for everyone else while completely exempting themselves from any of those same standards. Very bizarre story. And I mean, it's a bizarre story and it's also completely unremarkable. But I guess now even Heimbach has given a couple of interviews where he says his involvement in white supremacy is not going that well. And one interview I read recently had him say he's sort of giving up the entire Traditionalist Workers' Party. Like it just hasn't really gone anywhere for him.
Maybe he can find a new group, join a book club perhaps.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'd love to see the reading list for that book club. We have a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. We have a very angry caller today who believes that I should be covering the Russia story, but I'm covering the wrong Russia story. Here's what this caller has to say.
I think you should investigate Hillary and Bill with Russia. Don't worry about Trump. It's Hillary and Bill the one took millions and millions of dollars from them for uranium being traded with Canada.
Right.
Y'all's a bunch of idiots.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing your perspective on what we should and shouldn't be covering. We've got a fantastic bonus show for you today. Oklahoma is going to start using nitrogen for executions. This is an unprecedented move. A French baker has been fined nearly $4,000 for working too much. The French really take vacation time and reasonable work hours very, very seriously. And a judge is slamming the door on more lawsuits by the Clock Boy family. If you don't know what that is, I will tell you on the bonus show. 2 ways to access the bonus show. Number 1, become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Number 2, become a patron for as little as $5 a month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. And remember, free bumper stickers. We've got the white bumper sticker and the black bumper sticker available to all new yearly members. You can use the coupon code VOTESOON18 to get a 40% discount, and then just email me and say, hey, David, here's my address. Send me one of those bumper stickers.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.